Well, good evening.
Hello. Good evening.
I'm Rick Webb. So thanks for coming out. And thanks for Mississippi State for inviting Susan and I up to talk to you guys. I hope it's rewarding and I hope we have some fun. We're Louisiana Growers. We're a wholesale nursery company. We've specialized in Gulf Coast natives for quite a while now and have found that we need to do almost extension work as well as production work and things like that. So we wind up doing a lot of these kinds of presentations to try to get people interested in our stuff. So, but our primary trade is to sell to landscape contractors and architects and the guys in some retail garden centers who use our plant material. So that's supposed to be the lazy guy under the tree there that you're supposed to wake up and bring money to. And LANativeplants.com is our wholesale website. I want to preface everything I do by saying that we're going to talk about some natural things. And I'll just take a shot here. Master gardeners present. So we have a lot of master gardeners, and we're trained to be on top of things and do things. I take a little bit of different look about these things. I look at these systems and sometimes I don't really know if I understand totally what's going on. So I walk out in my barn one day and I see this, and that's vise. That's a close-up of the vise in my barn, and there's some mud daubers have made their way into the barns. Now I never go wash the mud daubers off stuff. I figure that's okay. They're going to be there a while anyway. But then I noticed that for some reason, one of the mud daubers found a place where I did some road work and got the red clay out of that one. The other two that were building right next to it were somewhere else mining their clay and got the gray, the set of gray. And I saw that and I said, there's a slide. There's a slide right there. I want to preface what we do by saying, I don't know if we really know what's going on with these things sometimes. And this is a pitcher plant, Sarracenia alatas. And the other thing about nature and natural systems, when I look at them, I like to think also that what's going on here in this whole thing's there. When I see this, I see a chorus. I see voices. I hear songs. I hear there's like all these different throats of good place. And that's what's going on right there, though. That guy's fixing to go down. So here we are. The Mississippi State Trial Garden presents the story of functional landscapes. Isn't that great? And once again, I appreciate Jeff contacting us and getting us up here to talk about these kind of things. And so I hope to tell you a little story the way they say it is. This is your host here acting like a tree. The significance of that tree is that I was coming back from Arkansas and driving across through Indianola, Mississippi, and we stopped on the side of the road at a little rest area park, and somebody 15, 20 years ago had done a urban forestry tree planting and planted ginkgo, and sure enough, a lot of them were females, and there was one really nice male ginkgo tree there. And I made cuttings that day off of that southern trialed form of ginkgo. Now, it's not a native plant, so that's okay, but that's all right. It works in naturalistic landscapes, but it's a southern one. And we're going to call it Kermit's Home. That's going to be the name of it. Does anybody know why that is? Indianola, Mississippi is the home of Jim Henson. That's right. And in fact, on the sign right there at that little museum, it said the home of Kermit the Frog. So that's from there. And so but don't worry about it. There are also trees trying to look like people too. So Department of Landscape Architecture at Mississippi State University has proudly planted a lot of our plant material here. I want to commend the staff, the people here at the university. The work done here is some of the best in the South in these kinds of designs. And hopefully training a lot of healthy appetites toward that goal. And of course there's, I didn't warn Bob that he was going to be on the slides, but Bob Rusak, professor, Viburnum dentatum osceola was one of the first cultivated varieties that we went out in the wild and found I really like the form of this arrowwood viburnum and made cuttings of it. And when they were starting to do the School of Design, I said, man, you got to put one of these in there. And that was about 45 minutes ago. It's in full bloom right now in in the courtyard there. So I'm very proud of that association. So why natives? Or as importantly, why natural design? Those are two separate things, but not really. Ornamental enhancement of our environments. When we went to university, I studied, we had horticulture, or we had ornamental horticulture. Now we're talking about other things, but that primary is one of the various things. Feed and support native fauna, birds and the bees, and other insects. There's a lot of work now going on in water management, and we talk about that a lot. In fact, we'll look at a lot of slides on that. But one of the things I think about a lot is that every one of us in this room are living in a time in this part of the world where we have benefited from what has been done to our part of the world in the late 19th and early 20th century, when we converted to farming and we did forestry and we did all the things we've done, great, shopping malls and golf courses, baby, it's great. But really, that has changed this place. And one of the things I think we ought to all make an attempt to do is try to mitigate, literally, that change. And one of the best places, and I've stole this from Dr. Ptolemy, who's everybody's read his book, about using our cultivated gardens, our urban spaces, our home landscapes, and replace as many as we can of species that would have been here prior to development. So restore the damage done by our ancestors is a simple way of saying that. Minimal maintenance costs, but as important as everything else is remind us of a sense of place. I'll have a picture in a minute of a plant called Alyssium floridanum, starbush. When I see that plant even in my nursery every day, I still remember when I first saw it in the woods when I was a 15-year-old kid, and I smelled the leaves of that thing and I said, what is this? And I ran home to Mom to go see if we could get an idea what it was. Challenging perspectives and opportunities ahead. Let's get with it. Natural gardens. So first off, this is my friend Betty Miley's yard, and it's just it's a hodgepodge. It's a mess. It's all over the place. You got to have a little make sure you got a gargoyle if you can, but Joe Pye weed and some clethra and things like that. This is Sweet Bay magnolia, but this is Vitex. Vitex is kind of, they're breeding them now where they're sterile, so they won't come up down the hillside. So why not include those kinds of things in a garden where it's all native plants? But it's the form as much as anything. Sarracenia purpurea, the little red pitcher plants. And one of my favorite plants is Crataegus opaca, mayhaw. Showy flowers, wildlife food, home gardener's jelly, edible. Small, site-adaptable, sculptural form tree. It's got things going on right there. What a great, great plant. It's full of thorns, so don't put it right next to your sidewalks, but what a great, great tree and beautiful, beautiful fruit. Mayhaw. This is arrowwood viburnum. So we're feeding birds now. Anyone who knows, and there are people who give gardening talks on just birds, and you should hear those, and I won't attempt to do that. But there's really three things, resting and nesting spaces, water, and of course food. And so this is arrowwood viburnum in fruit. We don't think about arrowwood's blue fruit as being as showy as it is, but as much as importantly, this is the thrush diner. And then the fall color that comes on it is another aspect of arrowwood viburnum that we kind of overlook sometimes, that we get this beautiful fall color look, and still got some fruit hanging on it. I've got a big one in my nursery, and every year when the middle of winter, all of a sudden you see all the bird nest that's in it every year. They use it. You don't know that they're using it, but they love that plant for that purpose. Ilex vomitoria. All of the Yopon hollies, all the work that's been done with those, it's just really huge, huge work. And then, of course, all the other hollies. This is one called Ocracoke, which was actually from South Carolina, but it's a beautiful holly under snow at my nursery. Here's Alyssium floridanum. And that's, we were pulling an order and going through the 3-gallon block, and we had to stop because they're the birds that were nesting in it. But there's another thing about this picture that I think is essential. Does anybody want to see what else they see? There's holes in the leaves, right? We don't spray insecticides in our nursery. We have bug holes on our plants. It's okay. How many people now are gardening? How many people plant milkweed specifically in hopes that it will be eaten down? That is a new, I say a new thing, but it's not what you might have learned 25 years ago or 30 years ago in college, that we were going to spray things and we wanted to prevent bug damage. No, we want our plants to be eaten in some cases. So because we don't use insecticides and because there are bugs there on these plants and the Illicium has holes in the leaves, it's also good habitat. Red buckeye. When I think of red buckeye, I think of springtime and hummingbirds, and that coevolution of the crimson hummingbirds that are coming across from the Gulf and coming into our woods. Is it pretty? It's gorgeous. Is it an interesting little small shrub, a large shrub, small tree? Yes, absolutely. Is it important for hummingbirds? Absolutely. So we should use this plant all the time. I don't know how to do depth of field in my photographs. I apologize. Maybe some of you do, but so that should be focused better on the wasps on that plant. But who knows that plant from the flower, other than Bob Rusak? That is Cyrilla racemiflora, swamp tie-tie. Now, it is a thicket plant. It is a unruly, suckering, massing, plant. Grows in standing water to slightly upland. But most importantly, just now, wherever it is in bloom, everybody is there. It is the bee and wasp magnet in our landscapes. And I've got a big hedge of it all the way around my pond, my irrigation pond in my nursery, and you go out there and you hear it before you see it. You just hear the activity. So if we're worried about the pollinators, should we be planting milkweed? Absolutely. Are there hundreds, literally, or at least dozens, but hundreds of species that we should be planting, and I would recommend swamp cyrilla. Now, once again, let me back up. It is a unruly, it works really well in natural thicket designs rather than just as a specimen tree, but great plant. This is Monarda. Bee balm with the butterfly on it. It's a monarch on Sarracenia leucophylla. Of course, he's probably drawn to the fragrance that is the trap for everybody else. I don't think the butterfly can get down the trumpet, so it's probably safe. But one of the Sarracenias. Cephalanthus occidentalis buttonbush. Here again, we had a field day at the Hammond Research Station. If you ever get a chance to get down to the Hammond Research Station, LSU Ag Center operates. This is in Louisiana, between just north of New Orleans, across the lake. The trial garden there, and especially the wild garden that's under the pine trees and the azalea garden there is really starting to become a true destination in the Gulf South, certainly. Worth your time if you get a chance to go there. But anyway, we're out there in a trial garden one day when they had all of these beautiful beds of petunias and all these things. They were walking around, and I elbowed the guy and said, look where the butterflies are. Down by the pond was an isolated button bush where everybody was. They weren't in the flower beds. They were down there on this plant. This is one of the favorite butterfly trees. Water plant. Arrowwood viburnum again. Arrowwoods got fruit and flower and fall color and form and site adaptability, but they're musty. They smell like wet socks. But other than that, that's a wonderful, wonderful plant. But at least we remove or reduce the use of pesticides. I saw this just the other day at a hardware store. Has anybody ever seen this? Huh? Have you ever tried one? I was going to buy one just to see, So anyway, but we try to reduce the use of pesticides. And we do that in our nursery, and we try to recommend the use of native plants in case they would do. But I haven't tried the bug salt yet. Water resources. So this is a project that I was delivering to out in Houston area, but it is now a component of almost every urban design now that we have to manage water. And we've got to build ways of trapping water and slowing its process, its movement down, instead of speeding the movement, which we've always done. Now we're slowing water down and keeping it on site as long as possible, then moving it out. And of course, using plants as a function of that process. And if we can make it pretty, then that would all be well and good. But this pond here actually was built, should have a better shelf, but that's another design element. But anyway, all these plants will go around. We've been seeing this growing more and more because this is what we're trying to do. We want to mitigate, mimic wild. That's button bush over the top of a water. That's just on the side of a road somewhere. I saw the picture and I stopped. In the urban setting, this is parks and parkways in the city of New Orleans. The city of New Orleans has a pretty comprehensive stormwater management code now that requires all developers to trap, I think it's the first 1.5 inches of rainfall that falls on the site and hold it for at least 24 hours before it's released. And this was at the offices of one of the parks and parkways, and they've built their own swale there. As you can see, it's down. This is a commercial one out in New Orleans East. These guys have got permeable pavement, and then this pit underneath there, and that pit is actually 3.5, 4 feet deep, and it's filled with this really, really loose material with just a mulch on top of it, and it'll hold a lot of water, and then that water slowly then is supposed to work into the ground, and they're buying Louisiana iris from us, and I said, I have to have a picture. We are going, if we're not seeing, if everyone's not seeing this now, we will see it everywhere in the near future. It is starting to happen on a larger scale. I love this. This is Austin, Texas. This is a corporate campus kind of in Austin, Texas. And for those of us who have been in the trade for a while, and we're used to, in the back, these growers that take these cultivated varieties of trees, these maple trees that are all grown from one cutting or grafted, so they're clones to begin with, and then they stake every one of them so they're perfectly, and put the shear on them so they're all identical, so that we can plant them in these formal groves, and that's a beautiful architectural style. But then we migrate down here by the pond edge, and we've got thalia and all of these other things just kind of running amok out there by the edge of the water. They're kind of running out of ways and going into the water, and it's just a contrast to me in design, but how we can allow the rain garden part of it, the water part, to be natural, and still want our little lollipop trees. So anyway. This is at a school in New Orleans. I was asked to come down. They got a grant to do a demonstration rain garden for the kids there, and they were renovating this courtyard inside the school. You can't really see it really well, but you see that little thing right there? That was the storm drain when this thing was built. So this cutout where they now have a bed was a planting bed. It had grass probably. They probably never maintained a landscape. There was probably sod, but they had built this stormwater drain that would catch that water. So when developing a rain garden, the first thing they did was go in and dig all of that out. That's about 12, 15 inches down now. And that water will attract in that swale. Of course, they were getting ready, the plants are over here. They're getting ready to plant this. They had put the 2 cypress trees in first. But then when it fills up with water enough, then the drain takes over and it becomes the secondary phase of it. So that's our design rain gardens. Native plants in those places. We actually have architect plans of these things. Garden Center in Little Rock, Arkansas has a water garden plant center. I was really, really amazed. I said, look at this, and there was some ideas on how to, what plants go where in relation to the water level, and submerged and edge plants, and for all the information we need to grow on that. So I'm making a big deal out of the water gardens because that is one of the huge, huge ways now we're using plants. This is at, I can't remember, it's the library. We were on a Mississippi native plant trip. It may have been Tupelo. And they've got a rain garden built where the water comes off the building, comes along down through here, and it's stone and plants, and then as soon as you go right around the corner, that runs out and stops. So that catches all of that water off that area. This was a Mississippi Native Plant Society tour we were at. Some of the plants that grow there, pickerelweed, I love pickerelweed, absolutely a wet plant. It's an obligate. We have a way of classifying these wetland plants, and it has to be in water. But a beautiful, beautiful blue flower, freezes down in the winter, comes back up every year, and of course attracts butterflies. This is Iris virginica, blue flag iris, another great functioning plant for those kinds of things. Copper iris, Iris fulva. All the Louisiana irises are great wetland plants. But I like this. I just like open pollinated mixes. Those are seedling irises. Every kind of color in the rainbow. So if you can mitigate stormwater and have beauty, why not? This is at Longview Gardens in Orleans. Cephalanthus occidentalis buttonbush is an underutilized shrub as a multi-stem small tree. You know, it really, when you prune out some of these things and we make them into small trees, they tend to sucker back out and they don't hold real well. Buttonbush does a really good job and has these great scaly trunks on them. I think we could do that. There's Cyrilla again. This is a larger plant in full flower. That's actually a form we found that is shorter, fatter, tighter. We're trying to do some work in making these things a little bit more civil. So we're going to do this. Let's go after it. Let's get with it. Natural design. This is not rocket science. That's real simple. Nature's designs are irregular, not random. Nature plants to fill niches. It's our chore to identify these niches and figure out where they are, what they are, and use the right tool. I don't like to have people say that native plants are carefree and everything is just, oh, it's a native, you can just set it out there. And that is not true. I don't care how many times you've read it in magazines. In fact, some of the native plants we would love to use in gardens are so site-specific that they aren't always usable in every landscape. You know, you really do need to have just what they need. And I don't care if a plant's from Asia or from Tibaha County, you got to water it the first year it's planted. I mean, once established, you know, maybe all right. So anyway, but once we identify that niche and put the right plant there and are willing to let it grow as it will, then all of a sudden the idea of low maintenance or better, is easier. Never an even number. I saw a presentation one time by a woman who was doing bonsai in saucers, and they were doing these little forests where they put multiple bonsai plants in, and her rule was it has to be 11 or 7. And when I heard that, I thought about that, I don't like when people come to me and they say we want 2 southern sugar maples, but they've got to be identical match because they're going on either side of the driveway. My immediate response is, well, just set one back about 3 feet then more than the other one. At least unbalance it that way, but don't give me that one on either side thing. I mean, that's 2, that's an even number. I'm sorry, you can't do that. Plant 3 over here and 1 over here. So think about how the native fauna, including the humans, use the land and how that could change over time. One of the things that we see in natural design and natural landscapes, a functioning landscape, is the evolution that takes place. Things that pop up that were unsurprising, they were there before. Seeds, the birds, the vectors, the wind brings things in. And if you allow these things to evolve, you'll see how it changes over time. When we plant trees, now I've been on my property since '83, and I had a pretty open old field. Had grown back up in trees. We live in a woodland. And in fact, we're finally, this may be the year I don't cut grass after all these years. So it is fine. So that has changed over time. You got to think about that when you make your, but then don't overthink. And then remember, we're the observant co-inhabitors. If we really think about how a landscape functions and we think about the other beings that live here and live with us, it helps. All of this stuff's on a website if you want to. There's a PDF of this at lanative.plants.com if y'all want to do this or take the screenshots. But plan first, then add the T at the end. Plan first, then add the T. Think of the garden as a forest in layers. Buy books on woodlands and prairies and read them. I've got all sorts of books. You got to open them, but use them. Study your site and surrounding similar stable sites and their specimens. Seek out the right species. Now, I have been doing this a long time, and we're just now maybe at the point, and I'm also always trying to work with the trade, and that if you really want to do native plants in natural landscapes, sometimes the supply of those plants at the point of retail, at your landscape contract, the education level of the professionals who are out there doing it is not up to where some of the gardeners are. And if you really want these things, you got to go find them. You got to work for it. And I hate to say that, but we're at a window, and at some point, every wholesale grower and every landscape contractor will be comfortable with Oretha virginica. It's getting there now, Virginia willow, but it's not there yet. So I ask you to try to work with us on that. Select species as the habitat. Plant selections. Ask yourself if the F words of seasonality, flowers, form, foragers, fruit, and fall color are important to you. Create woodlands and thickets. Get rid of lawn except for small areas that mimic water, that calming look of lawns, a place to throw the frisbee. Other than that, we don't really need lawns. So diversity rules. Diversity rules. So restoration. So back to what I said earlier about mitigating and putting back the things that were in your place, were a part of the land before we made the dramatic changes that we did. I live in the Florida parishes of Louisiana, north of Lake Pontchartrain, just south of Macomb for anybody, and go down to I-55 and Amite's about the second exit. That's longleaf pine country. Originally, we were in longleaf pine country, and that's a very specific habitat and would have been a tremendous thing. Lots of big, tall pines. Natural fire was a form of that environment, both wildfire and also even Native American managed anthropogenic fire, but man fire. So, but of that place this is a longleaf pine stump. This is where the original crown was, the ground level, and this was below the ground. And when we cleared the property, they bulldozed up one, and I said, oh boy, I want that. And I put it over there and set it in there. That's 80 growth rings of heartwood, and then beyond that, so 100 and 150-year-old tree. We're pretty sure we know that our area was clear cut in around 1913, 1918, somewhere along in there. And so that's my 250-year-old piece of art that's in the garden, but it's of the place. And when you do longleaf pine, that's one right there. This is down in Florida, where behind it, those guys in south of Tallahassee were planting it all in sand pine for pulpwood production. But somewhere right alongside the highway, there was one longleaf that was outside of their thing, and I said, oh, there's the picture. And so now when that thing they have on television where they say, 10 years after people, 25 years after people, whenever that after people thing happens and the big fire comes through and all that sand pine is not fire tolerant, will be gone, the old longleaf will be there to replant it. But pond cypress is another function of the wetter aspects of longleaf pine in the Florida parishes. Does everybody know pond cypress? It is a distinct species from common bald cypress. It's a different look. ascendant foliage, Taxodium ascendens, but this more almost vertical look to it. Wet site, and grows right with longleaf and is fire tolerant. And sweet bay magnolia. I don't have a good picture of a good tree. That's a nursery picture of a whole crop of them, but those little magnolia flowers. I just saw there's 3 gorgeous ones at Thompson Hall right over here that are right against that building. Just a beautiful use of that plant. One of our native magnolias. Who knows this plant? What's it called? Beautyberry, thank you. No French mulberry fans? Thank you. Because I get that all the time. And it's American beautyberry, so the Latin name is Calla carpa, Calla, pretty. Carpa, body, fruit, Americana. So, but it's not French, and it's not in the genus Morris. It's not a mulberry. So that is a function of those things. This pops up on my property. My land has been farmed before me for generations, literally, decades. Like I said, it was clear cut in 1913. And after a while of me quitting farming, I go out and find these little herbertias, which is an iris family, little spring ephemeral, comes up in pine lands. Those seeds have been there for 100 years, for 80 years, waiting for stabilization to come back. So now, I don't know of any nursery that sells this thing, so you can't go out and go buy it and plant it, but what happens on its own is just incredible to me. And there's our cyrilla again, because we want to see the fruit on it and the fall color again. Those are all a function of the wet pine savanna. So my friend Johnny Marone, who's a well-known plantsman in the Covington area, he's quite the native guy. He calls me and he says, Rick, he said, you got to go down 190, and he tells me over there's this yellow, and I'm sorry, I heard flowered form of tie-tie about 3 years ago. So I drove down and I couldn't find what he was talking about. I said, John, I went all through there. Where are you talking about? Second bridge on the left, by the, and so the other day I was down there down in this area, and I called him. I said, John, I'm here and I'm driving this way. Tell me, all right, go up to the one bridge, second bridge, turn and look. And he said, it's right there, it's yellow. And I finally realized he meant a yellow foliaged form of tie-tie. So, and this is the green, the standard one over here. This is wax myrtle actually here on both sides of it. Louisiana iris, what a great natural border. If we could mimic these things in design, that's what we're trying to do. But is there a place in the gardening world for a chartreuse foliaged cyrilla? So we made cuttings off of it, and they're just stuck right now, and we'll do something with it. I'm gonna call it Neon John, just for John. Prairies. A lot of people, we don't necessarily live in natural prairie here. Well, I'm sorry, we're on the edge of the Blackland, right over here. That's exactly right. And certainly the pine lands that had open savanna forest had natural prairies. This is actually a picture taken near Forest, Mississippi. There's the Forest Service has got an area that they're maintaining for prairie, and that's Asclepias tuberosa. One of the things that and Bob and I were talking about that before, one of the things that we have a problem in the commercial trade is we tend to use our shotgun approach, pine bark soils, plastic containers with inorganic fertilizers, with water cycles maybe that are a little too wet, and the pH might be a little too low, but then we try to take some of these native plants that really have pretty specific demands and probably would rather be in natural soil than in a pine bark media in a production nursery. I have had trouble growing Asclepias tuberosa. There's some great work that's going on down now with Mississippi State. I know Pat Drackett's involved with it. The guys at Poplarville are working on doing work with helping us figure out how to grow Asclepias. But if you can get it, boy, it's gorgeous. And that's the other flowering form. It goes to that orange, almost red. And as you're walking around in these prairies and you see this kind of diversity, wouldn't that be lovely to have that? Native grasses, blue stem and andropopogon or a broom sedge, great native plants. Functions of longleaf pine savannas. There's my friend Dave burning his little prairie. Fire is a tool in the landscape. We haven't quite got there yet. We're building rain gardens, but we haven't quite got to where people are burning their yards off regularly. But that's what happens. A little aster, a little goldenrod, obviously a fall picture. Care over time. Mimic fire in the garden. Prune and mow irregularly. Our beautyberry we were talking about earlier, French mulberries or Calicarpa americana is a great example of that. You can plant one in your yard. How many have one in their yard already, right? Few years old, 5, 6 years old, that thing gets straggly. It starts growing out of itself and it starts getting kind of woody. Maybe it doesn't even flower and fruit as well as it used to. That plant, if we understand where it came from, was meant to be burned to the ground every once in a while. So let's go ahead and take about every 3 or 4 years and prune it with a chainsaw, okay? And cut it way back. Even doing mowed area, even if you can't have a prairie where you are, if you will just simply allow those back off on your spring mowing, enjoy the alliums and the wildflowers that do come up in the spring, bloom, after those, we have those spiranthes are up right now down by us. Of course, we hadn't had much rain, but sometime now, go ahead and do your mowing, after those things pass. Or don't mow at all, and then maybe midsummer mow high, and then fall mow hard. And just take parts of your garden and just prune and mow irregularly. Let the bugs live, provide water for wildlife. Attempt to control invasive plants. You will not win, but work at it. Watch for native volunteers, promote succession. Mulch, 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 mulch. So a few years ago, we finally built an office and took an old building and we renovated it and moved it out there and set it up. And then I decided I was going to make me a bird thicket right in front of my office. My goal was that people who were coming to me to buy stuff would have to walk through, kind of like, okay, where do I pay, and to go bring me money. And so we did that. So American hornbeam, Carpinus caroliniana, Amelanchier arborea serviceberry, the true deciduous sweet bay, the true Magnolia virginiana, arrowwood viburnum, dwarf wax myrtle. The list goes on. There's right there is 7 species. It goes all the way around. Clethra, Elysium floridanum, and just 3 of these and 1 of those. Our design professionals might not quite see it. I think Bob does, but anyway. So, and then that was at 06, and this is starting to what it's looking like now, right? So, great, and lots of things. You sit on that deck. I'm sorry, that was mid. This is what it looks like. This was this morning, and in fact, that arrowwood viburnum right there is in full flower. And the hornbeam and the magnolia and the Mexican plum that's right behind it and the serviceberry are starting to form an arch. And you got to get you one of them big chickens. Always get one of them big chickens. Our Johnny Marone we talked about before, and I hope I'm not going too fast because we're getting toward the end of this, but this is his front yard. Like everybody, y'all know him well. I listened to Felder Rushing on the radio, and I remember years and years ago, Felder was telling the story when he moved in this neighborhood in Jackson, Mississippi, where he lived. Everybody thought, oh boy, we're going to have that famous guy living in our garden, and he claims until they saw his landscape. Now, I've never seen his house. I don't know what it looks like, but I can only imagine that it's busy, and so John is almost that way too with his front yard in this nice, polite Covington neighborhood, He's just stuck everything possible right out in front of the house. You know, some people say, well, you know, do the front kind of normal, you know, but then go in the backyard behind the fence and you can do whatever you want to, both in how you dress in your pool or how you landscape, you know. So, but keep it behind. But they don't. Now, any comments? I want someone to say, what is that thing doing there? That's not a native, right? No. In fact, a third of the plants in this garden are not native plants. John ran a company called Natives Landscape Corporation. I mean, that was what he did for a long time. It doesn't have to be a native plant. It has to be natural design, and I wanted that to be separate. That's where the function of functional landscapes comes in. And when we do things and just plant around and let them, he's got a water hose. Every once in a while, he puts the water on, but no pruning, no weeding. None of that. So before the trouble starts, get together with your neighbors and talk. So I really, when you do this in an urban setting, and I don't mean to sound like it, but you need to make sure everybody understands what you're going to do with your landscape. One of the ways we learn about these plants is to join and go tour with the Mississippi Native Plant Society, the Louisiana Native Plant Society in my state. Wherever you are, there are groups of people who are out there who go into the wild places and find a botanist and find somebody who knows what they're talking about. Invariably in those groups, there'll be a bird person, there'll be butterfly people, and you'll hear this discussion on the side, and they're talking about what genus that is of that particular wildflower, so that's my friend Gail Barton right there, but they're out there in the woods. Find a park that has a native plant gardening, educational signage, wildfire. This is a park in Hammond, Louisiana that's doing a prescribed fire-maintained landscape around the stormwater detention pond. And they've got a sign there for the kids to read everything about all the bugs and birds and why they're doing this. And got a little wire to keep the kids from getting in the water, but it's out there. Take a kid out and show them what it's all about. That's my friend Lattimore Smith, who just recently won a national award in Covington from the Environmental Law Center for his work in career with a nature conservancy in longleaf pine restoration. And they had some friends over, and I'm sorry, I'm into this kind of thing. This little girl just had to go, wait a minute, what is this? And she went over and touched those pine needles. She had not noticed the trees that had leaves like that before. If we do nothing else, this is what I think we need to be doing. Go out and look for the bright spot in your environments. I'm walking out of the field one time, out of a walk with the native plants, and there was long shadows at the end of the day, and there was a silhouette of this with a ray of sunshine in the middle of this shadow, and I turned around and looked back up, and it's an old hollow water oak where it's hollow all the way through, but the sun was shining all the way through it. So just to recover, remember the reasons for the functional landscape. Restoration, 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 restoration. Mitigation, what we do to make up for the changes, what we do for stormwater management, what we do for the interruption of normal cycles of other beings, what we do for the soil, the water. Maintenance, it is natural designed, native landscapes are, in fact, once established, low maintenance. Habitat, obviously, and then beauty, and then beauty. I proudly wear my Mississippi State shirt, certainly when I come up on campus. I have the honor of being what they call them alumni dads. Susan and I both are from Southeastern Louisiana University. I would have to point out that some of you may be baseball fans and may have noticed that there was this little road trip you took down to Hammond, and that little school down there beat the Bulldogs this year. And in fact, depending on what happens in the tournament this week, in our tournament and your tournament, and doesn't look like that other school down the road from us is going to make it into the regionals. We might wind up having to come back up here and give you a chance to make up for that little minor error. But so we're Southeastern Lion fans, and so but I wear my state shirt when I occasionally, especially at functions in Baton Rouge. I just love to do that. So, are there any questions? Oh, please. Yes, ma'am.
When you say that's a function of the longleaf pine, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Okay. I thought I might have gone over that too quickly. So that's where that part I said a word about rocket science, this being complicated. So where I live, my place was historically there's this big term called bioregimes. It was an area, a typic of the longleaf pine forest. And when you study those habitats, then you say, well, if it was longleaf pine forest, there was beautyberry, there was sweet bay, there might have been pond cypress, those other slides I showed. So those are all indicative of the associated plants. Now, you may live in the Blackland Prairie over here, in eastern Mississippi. Well, there's a lot of plants that grow just there. You see those red cedar berries all up and down. That's where those plants love it, and there's all the things that go there. You may live near a Tupelo swamp where there was common bald cypress, and that's what I was talking about. So there are, each of us, if we know the place where we are and know a little bit about can learn, read the right book about what should have been there, it helps us when we do our native gardening to put back the species of the place. And in my case, it's longleaf pine, and that's not a good bit of Mississippi. So it might have been that. The Delta, hardwoods, pecan and hackberry and all the water hickories and all those things that would have been along the Mississippi River. And of course, all the other things that went with just the trees. That would be another bioregime. So that's what I was referring to. You need to know a little bit about your sense of place. Yes, ma'am.
Do beautyberries have to be a certain age to bloom and fruit?
They do. Here again, usually 3-4 years old, even from a seedling. When you buy one in a nursery, generally those are already 2-3 years old, and it's not uncommon to see fruiting on them.
I transplanted some out of the woods.
Okay.
And they have not bloomed.
How long they've been moved?
About 2 years.
Okay. You should be right now. They're starting to flower, so you'll see the flower buds should be developing excellent. Now, prefers bright light. So if it's too shady, it's that old thing about if it's too shady, a plant may grow well, but it may not flower and fruit as well as you want to. And then I would recommend that if you don't get good fruit production this year, go back to what I said next year in late winter, early spring, that kind of February 15th date or whatever we do these things, and cut them off. Cut them off. Prune them. Yeah, and let them come again. But if it's too shady, that could be it too. So, but they should do all right. We have one we've selected that is a pretty heavy fruiter, and it's a smaller foliage, and we have made cuttings off of it, and hopefully it's going to be a good addition. Which leads me to another question I'll ask myself. Well, what about nativars? Who has heard that term? Yes. So there has been some talk, and if you're really going to do naturalistic landscaping using native plants, the last thing you want to do is go find a particular form, a flower, a fruit, a shape, and make cuttings off of it or grafting so that you're copying the genetics of that plant, like we do with almost everything that's in the horticulture trade now. All the roses, all the camellias, all the azaleas, all of those are cloned. They're made from cuttings, so when you plant a row of Professor Sargent camellia, they're all the same plant and they're all the same flower color. Well, with natives, some of my friends are pretty esoteric about this and said that that's not the case, that the idea that I said earlier about diversity and having a mixture of things going on is not just in a mixed border of multiple species, but also within a given species, that they all have to be grown from seed. so that one might be a little earlier flower, one might get the disease, one might not, and things like that. So I try to stay away from that a little bit. I'm also at a wholesale nurseryman. I'm selling to people who are doing commercial design. And there is an element of commercial design that says, you know what, I do want this bed to be switchgrass, but I want it all to be this big, even blue looking, so I want it to be Panicum virgatum Dallas blue. So then I know that all of that switchgrass is the same look. And so we have kind of a two stories there, but so sometimes people say you shouldn't even do cuttings, but we try to do some of that. Any other questions? Jeff?
Yeah, so out west, the native plant industry really kind of got a bump from xeriscaping, I guess, for lack of a better term. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was kind of that was the hook that they used to get consumers into native plants. And it seems like in the southeast, we're still struggling a little bit.
Right.
Do you think do you think it's rain gardens? Do you think what's something that we could use as a hook?
I think two things. So rain gardens certainly, and the commercial aspect of those. If we all eventually, and we will in the very near future, go to Walmart, those pits that are out in the parking lots that were these raised beds with up trees are going to be reversed. That is starting to happen now. It will be the standard everywhere. Once we see that as commercial, it will sink that in a little bit more in the mindset of the consumer. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to quote a friend of mine, Malcolm Vadrine, who's involved with in southwest Louisiana, the Cajun Prairie. They've done a restoration prairie in Eunice, Louisiana. All of good bit of southwest Louisiana was a natural prairie before development, and they've gone back and are creating a new one in the town of Eunice. Malcolm's character, and he thinks that the monarch butterfly is what he calls the gateway bug. The gateway bug. And that if nothing else, every magazine that people have picked up that says I need to plant milkweed for, that alone has done more to make people think about native plants, natural gardening, and in fact that idea of a plant being a part of an ecosystem, not simply something to look at. So I think that probably, as much as anything, there's something about the bees now. Everybody knows that the bee decline and things like that. I didn't know, and maybe y'all don't know either, that most of that problem with those bee declines were, of course, European honeybees, which are not a native species, first off. Secondly, there are these colonies, these hives that live on freight trucks. They drive them to the almond tree orchards and they flower there, and then they drive them somewhere else, and then they pollinate those other things. And that is not a natural system anyway, and that's going to a good bit of the problem. But the bees, and people are pollinators everywhere, every magazine, every paper. Those are the two things, that and rain gardens, I think are probably going to help us most. Yeah. You had a question? Yes.
Native azaleas.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you use them? I didn't notice any.
I didn't see any pictures, show any pictures of them. I love native azaleas. So everybody knows the rhododendron species that we have in the southeastern United States. Our azaleas are deciduous plants. There's a whole bunch of them, and they're really very specific. We have Piedmont azalea, the pink one, in our woods down there, and then there's another one that's a summer blooming, white flowered form that's in our woods, so swamp azalea. Those rhododendrons are, of the native plants that we're talking about, those are some of the ones that have to be sited correctly and have to be healthy and cared for, and you got to be done right. And so they're difficult to propagate, they're slow to grow, and here again, that kind of nursery production system, they do like acid soils. The pine bark is perfect for that, but we tend to overwater them, and you get poor root systems on them, and it can be a tricky plant. If you go see wild azalea in my woods down there, they're down in the creek bottoms, but they're in that wonderful alluvial sand from these creeks, and plenty of leaf mulch, and it's just the perfect soil, and that's where they're best grown. There's a species that's in Florida called Rhododendron ostrinum, the yellow flowered form. It's called flame azalea or Florida azalea, and it ranges from pale yellows, mostly yellow, to orange, sometimes almost burnt orange, almost red, but got a deep orange. It's a little bit more vigorous, and it's probably my favorite one for typical garden establishment. But yeah, beautiful plants, hummingbirds, everything's going on. Just a little tricky. Yes, ma'am.
What's going on with dogwoods?
What's going on with dogwoods? I think there's a lot of people who have a lot more degrees than me that are talking about that. I have a picture of dogwoods I used to use in slide presentations, and I would say, show this to your grandkids, they're gone. Just don't even, just forget it. It's gone. It's past. Now, I was over in West Louisiana in the Kisatchie Forest this spring. The dogwoods are beautiful. I was down in the Panhandle of Florida near the other side of Tallahassee, full bloom. They're doing great. There's something that's right here in the center of the Gulf Coast where the dogwoods are dying. And if you go take tissue samples, you'll get anthracnose. You'll get the things that they normally have, but they're not fatal. In my woods, the land that I just described that we've had for 30 some years, I didn't bulldoze it. It's not compaction. I didn't do mechanical, go in and disturb the root systems. This was just a natural woodland. Used to have big dogwoods in them. There's one left, and it keeps suckering out from the root and trying again and make maybe a few flowers. I don't know the answer to that question, and I think a lot of people don't either. So Gary, you have any thoughts on dogwood? No. The only thing, and I get pretty weird, but I can tell you this may be one of those things that's like they say that if you wear Adidas tennis shoes, you're going to be healthier. It's not the tennis shoes, it's just that you exercise, right? But I can tell you, if you go and plot the areas where we see the problems with the dogwoods and go back about 20,000 years ago and look at the Mississippi River Delta, it's the same space. There was no land there. I don't know what that means, but I can tell you I was going through the water atlas and looking at the story of the Mississippi River Delta, and I looked at that map of about 10,000 years ago where the Mississippi River used to stop about Vicksburg, and it went to about Mobile Bay and about Corpus Christi. The rest was an open bay. That is exactly the area where dogwoods are fading right now. That's what, you remember the slide earlier about why the one dauber picked orange clay? That's kind of what I'm getting at. I don't pretend to be able to explain these things. This is huge stuff. I think we all should all be humbled by this. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have a list of some plants that you would like to see planted more often around the area?
So truth, beauty, and all those things are in the eyes of the beholder. So I don't do much. I was given the topic one time by Dr. Alan Owens, who's a PhD and was a great horticulturist, just retired from the Ag Center in New Orleans. He gave me this talk. He said, Rick, I want you to talk about the top 10 native trees for urban landscapes. So I was at the presentation, and so I said, okay, first slide, Magnoliaceae, the whole family of magnolias. Coniferaceae, the whole family of conifers, Roseaceae, all of those, so don't try to, I'm gonna, sweet bay, no, I don't play that game, because I can't do that. I was asked once by a good friend of mine who's a forester who asked me my favorite tree, and she finally, she said, Rick, what are they gonna plant on your grave? And I said, well, it depends on where the grave is, and so it might, I don't know what species that would be yet, so I don't do, so I know, I could tell you then I have a few things that I know are my favorites, and I've mentioned some of those earlier. I think, I love sweet bay magnolia. I think it's just a versatile thing. It's a great adaptable tree. It's got all those things going on for it, flower and form, site adaptability. Obviously, I love Cyrilla if we're going to plant wetlands, and if we're going to plant thickets for birds, and if that's a wetter areas, I love those trees. May not be of your place, though. That would be probably maybe even a little bit, it goes all over, well up the country, but it's probably not right here. You know, so I would suggest that the things, all the hollies, there's just, there's all the hollies, all the native hollies, there's bunches of them, deciduous ones and evergreen ones. Those are some of the best ones for trees. I like eastern red cedar. I think it's got a lot of uses for it, and it's as tough as nails. It lasts a long time in the landscape. Even when it dies and falls over, it can stay there for a long time and be kind of cool looking. I have some friends of mine that have a dead one in their yard, and they've never removed it. They put Confederate jasmine on it, and it's a great arbor, you know, a natural arbor. So anyway, so I'll try to avoid that question if you don't mind.
Thank you. That's the closest I've ever gotten. I wrote them down.
Susan's writing them down, right?
I thought Bradford pear would be on it.
You thought Bradford pear would be on it, right? Yeah. You know, Jeff, I tell you, so here again, that whole thing about truth and beauty being variable. My neighbor's property is a grown-up thicket. There is a calorie, a wild pear, not a Bradford, but one of the wild pears has come up over there. And invariably, that thing, it's just right across the fence. It kind of hangs over the fence, and people they'll go through my nursery and go, "What's that blooming over there?" It's like, "Oh, that's a damn pear. I would have go cut it down for him, you know." But anyway, but it makes these little knotty little pears. They're on them right now. When those things fall, it is about the button bush are finished. That's where all the butterflies are. They like that rotten fruit on the ground to get moisture and feed on them. And you go by there, and those yellow suffers will just go, you know, just so that it's actually serving a function in the landscape, but not Bradford. Yes, ma'am.
Why is the Bradford so hated now?
Well, you know, it has been two things. It probably was overplanted. I don't care what it is. As humans, we go through fashion, right? So there was that time when everybody had to have one, and I think that if nothing else, that alone makes people kind of go, yeah, well, what else you got now? If you are in a place where it's cold enough, they get enough chill hours, they are literally starting to pop up everywhere in fields. Those species, those pears are becoming, invasiveness is not, let me back up, and I'm going to get off topic, but I have to get this story over because it's so clear. The birds, what's the guy's name that did the movie, the famous director? Huh? Alfred Hitchcock. The beauty of that story is what thing that Hitchcock could do to make us really, really scared was he touched on real things. And one of the real things in the birds is that opening scene where they're sitting there and they look over and there's like three ravens sitting right on the fence. And the people are kind of going, but you don't really, it's like nothing. Well, at the end of the movie, of course, they're running for their lives and they're being attacked by the thousands of birds. Invasiveness is exactly that process. I was down in Florida a couple of years ago driving along the interstate, and I look along the side of the interstate fence and there's a pyracantha, that plant that we've been landscaping using for years and years and years, growing up in a fence row. And I thought, that's odd, there's a pyracantha. And I went, birds, Hitchcock, just like that, there it is. Now, so are we going to, I can tell, I gave a talk for the professionals at Stephen F. Austin University for Dr. David Creech this past year, and at the end of the talk, my blow-off, the slide that I really wanted everybody to leave with was, weeding in my nursery this last year, I have noticed crepe myrtle seedlings popping up everywhere. Now, those of us who know the crepe myrtle world know that in the 80s, another species, we've had crepe myrtle in the United States for hundreds of years, the old Lagestromia indica, but we brought Lagestromia farii, another species in and bred them. It's this great program. It has always bugged me that this two Asian species that are bred and are all over the country now, they use Native American names to name that series. I don't know, why didn't use that for native plants, but that's all right. But Natchez crepe myrtle, everybody knows Natchez crepe myrtle is one of them. There's a whole world all named after native tribes. Those things have been in our environments now for about 30 years. Those things are starting to pop up. And in fact, seedlings of crepe myrtle, so we don't, the coolest thing that happened in the gardens at one point, is happening again. You know, somebody brought Chinese tallow one time before because it was a great tree. It is, but not when they go everywhere. So anyway, I showed a slide of some ferns I was growing, and just in a picture right there were 3 different seedling crepe myrtles that had popped up underneath one of my Basham's Party Pink, one of the cultivars of Farii Indica Cross, and I said, so, and of course now in the research world, everybody's talking about crepe myrtle bark scale. Who's not heard of that? It is a new scale insect that's coming into the United States that's really attacking, especially these Farii Indica hybrid crepe myrtles. So I'm thinking, my slide was, I said, now where are you going to be in 20 years with crepe myrtle bark scale? Maybe that's the best thing that could have happened, because we don't know that if these things that we have just been planting everywhere are going to wind up being the things that come up everywhere. Now, so to answer your question, is there something wrong with that? Is it wrong for a plant that was not here, that was brought here by man's efforts and becomes naturalized, becomes widespread? Some of us think that it would be better to preserve the species that are of the place, not the ones that are naturalized. But you can debate the ethics of that in your own self. I tend to side with trying to keep it in check. Japanese honeysuckle, the vine, is everywhere. If you go back far enough, it wasn't here. But now it's pretty common. In fact, is it now native? Is it naturalized? It's about space and time. No comment there though. I don't like Bradford pear. I don't like Bradford pear because it's a short-lived tree in the landscape. I don't like river birch because it's a short-lived tree in the landscape. River birch is native. It's very specific where it should be popped up along river streams and stabilized beaches, but then it's only supposed to be made for 40 years and start falling apart. They drop limbs like crazy. Native tree, but I just don't like it because of its true short-lived nature. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if this is the right place to ask. I have a tree that has armillaria, and I don't know what I can plant that when you have a problem with that later.
It has what?
The honey fungus,
Oh, the fire. Yeah.
it's dying.
Any help from that?
Can you repeat the question? We couldn't hear it back here.
She has a tree that has
Armillaria.
which is a fungus, a honey fungus on it. And she wants to know what she can do about that.
It's dying, and there's no getting rid of it, but I would like to be able to plant something there that's not going to be susceptible to that.
Something to that. You've stumped me. So one, what's that?
No, it's a willow.
A willow.
Yeah. It's dead. It's going to be.
Generally, for things like that, if you'll change genera or change families, especially if you change families, usually you're okay. So if you go back with something that's, if you've got an armillaria that's attacking willows, then if you put in an oak, it should be all right. If you put in something in the rosaceae, it should be all right. Something, just change it up. And
Thank you.
I'll go back to adding some of what I do know about that, though, is diversity, planting different things, just what he was talking about. And that usually when we see any disease or fungal problems, there's some underlying stress. There's something else going on. And that may be the case of the tree you had. Of course, not a willow. A willow doesn't, sometimes poor drainage shows up with these kind of things. So, anyone else? Okay. Thanks for coming out, guys. Appreciate it.